The rain was pouring so hard it felt like knives cutting against my skin. My shoes were soaked through, my cardigan clung heavy on my shoulders, and still, I stood there, pounding on the front door of the house I had spent 40 years turning into a home. Through the glass pane, I saw my daughter's face. Her lips were twisted in rage, her eyes cold in a way I had never seen before. "This is my house now!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the wooden door but cutting into me like a blade. Then, without hesitation, she slammed it shut, and I heard the sharp click of the lock sliding into place. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hand rested on the brass handle, trembling, not just from the cold, but from the shock. My own flesh and blood had locked me out of the very home where I once tucked her into bed, kissed her scraped knees, and cooked her favorite meals. The storm drenched me until I could hardly tell whether the tears on my cheeks were mine or the sky's. I stepped back onto the porch, staring at the curtains she yanked shut. The world outside felt cruel enough, but the betrayal behind that door was worse. I whispered to myself, after everything, after all I've done. But here's the thing my daughter didn't know, and it's the part of the story you'll want to hear. The house she claimed as hers wasn't truly hers. Not by blood, not by sacrifice, and certainly not by law. Because weeks before this night, I had gone to my lawyer and secured the real deed. And when the truth came to light, her face would drain of every ounce of color she had left. Before I dive deeper into how everything unraveled, let me pause for just a moment. My name is Ruth Parker. I'm 72 years old, a retired school librarian, and I've lived in this house since the day my late husband and I signed the mortgage papers all those decades ago. This home was supposed to be my safe place, the last piece of stability I had left in this world. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Now let me take you back, because this betrayal didn't happen overnight. No, it was years in the making, and perhaps if I'd listened to the signs, I could have prevented that rainy night from ever happening. It began with small things only a mother would ignore because her love blinds her. My daughter, Linda, always had a streak of stubbornness. Even as a little girl, she'd plant her feet in the ground and insist the world owed her what she wanted. I thought it was just childhood defiance, something she'd grow out of with guidance, love, and patience. But Linda didn't grow out of it. Instead, she grew into it. And somewhere along the way, she decided that everything I had built, everything I had fought to keep, wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. On that stormy night, shivering on my own porch, I realized the daughter I raised no longer saw me as her mother. She saw me as an obstacle, a hurdle, standing in her way of claiming what she believed belonged to her. The irony of it all was staggering. I had sacrificed my youth, my health, and so much of my happiness to ensure she had a better life. Yet there I stood, reduced to a stranger at my own door. Neighbors' lights flickered on across the street. Curtains shifted as they peeked out, some whispering to each other. I could only imagine what they were thinking. An old woman locked out of her house in the dead of night, begging to be let back in. My pride stung worse than the rain. But deep inside, past the humiliation and heartbreak, there was something else simmering. It was the knowledge that she was wrong, that her power was an illusion. And though she had won the battle that night, the war was far from over. Because what Linda didn't know, and what her smug husband hadn't bothered to consider, was that I wasn't as naive as they believed me to be. Months before, when the arguments first began and their tones turned sharper, I had walked into a lawyer's office. I had explained my fears, my doubts, and my wish to protect what was rightfully mine. That visit had changed everything. So as I stood there, cold and drenched, locked out of my own home, I found a strange kind of comfort. They thought they had won. They thought they'd broken me. But the truth was coming. And when it arrived, it would leave my daughter speechless. And that is how the storm outside my home became nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash inside it. I wasn't always the woman standing alone in the rain. No. Before that night, I was a mother who had poured her life into raising a child I thought would one day carry my legacy with pride. You see, my late husband, Thomas, and I bought that house when we were just 30. It was nothing fancy back then. Peeling paint, creaky floors, and a roof that leaked whenever the wind blew too hard. But we worked on it together. Every paycheck, every weekend project, every scraped knuckle and sleepless night went into turning those bare walls into a home filled with warmth. When Thomas passed away far too young, it was just me and our daughter, Linda. She was 16 then, angry at the world, angry at me, and angriest at the unfairness of losing her father. I tried to soften the blow, to be both mother and father at once, but I'll be honest, it nearly broke me. I took on double shifts at the library, tutoring children in the evenings just to keep the lights on. I learned to patch roofs, to fix leaky faucets, to stretch a meal for two into a meal for a week. I skipped new clothes, I skipped vacations, I skipped sleep, but what I never skipped was Linda's future. She wanted piano lessons? I found a way. She needed braces? I made payments month by month, hiding the bills so she wouldn't see the worry etched across my face. When her friends got new dresses for school dances, I stayed up late at night stitching together hand-me-downs so she wouldn't feel left out. Every sacrifice I made with one thought. At least she'll have a better life than I did. And for a time, I believed she understood. I remember one night. She was maybe 17, and I came home bone-tired, my hands raw from shelving hundreds of heavy books at the library. Linda surprised me with a cup of tea and said, "One day, Mom, I'll buy you a house bigger than this. You'll never have to worry again." I smiled at her then, tears prickling my eyes, believing she meant it. Believing she saw my efforts, believing she loved me for it. But children grow, promises fade, and the kindness in that girl's voice began to change. It started small. She wanted money for outings, clothes, little luxuries. I gave what I could, even when it meant skipping meals myself. She would pout if I said no, call me selfish, say her friends' parents did more. And somehow, I let her words sink into me. Let them convince me that perhaps I wasn't doing enough, even though I was breaking myself to give her everything. By the time she graduated, Linda had developed a taste for entitlement. She wanted more than what I could give, more than what she had earned. And when she met Greg, her future husband, those desires only grew sharper. Greg was charming on the surface, I'll give him that. He could talk his way through any room, shake hands, smile, and convince anyone he was your best friend. But underneath that smile, I saw the greed. He had a way of looking around the house as if he were cataloging it, piece by piece, already claiming it in his mind. The first time he visited, he said, "Nice place, Mrs. Parker." Must be worth a fortune in this neighborhood now. It should have been a harmless comment. But the way his eyes lingered on the deed, framed in my office, the same deed Thomas and I had signed decades ago, made me uneasy. Linda laughed, brushing it off, but I caught the way her eyes followed his. It was subtle then, but it was there. As the years passed, their hints grew bolder. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? You'd be more comfortable in a retirement community. This house is a lot for one person to handle." Every time they said it, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The home I had fought so hard to protect was no longer my safe haven. It was a target. And still, I tried to push the thought away. I told myself Linda was my daughter. She wouldn't hurt me. She wouldn't betray me. But love, I've learned, can be the cruelest kind of blindness. Because while I was still remembering the girl who once promised me a better life, she was slowly plotting to take the very roof I had built over her head. The saddest part of sacrifice isn't the work itself. It isn't the sleepless nights or the aching bones. The saddest part is realizing years later that the very person you sacrificed for now believes your sacrifices entitle them to everything you own. And the cruelest moment of all is when you realize they're willing to throw you out in the rain to prove it. I should have seen it sooner. I should have recognized the storm was already brewing. But when you love your child, you never believe they'll be the one to betray you. And yet, that's exactly what Linda did. When Linda married Greg, I hoped marriage would soften her edges. I thought maybe commitment, responsibility, even the thought of raising her own family would ground her, help her understand the weight of sacrifice. I was wrong. If anything, marriage became the spark that fanned her entitlement into a wildfire. At first, Greg was all politeness. He called me Mom, even though I'd only just met him. He carried groceries in, fixed a broken step on the porch, even complimented my cooking. But kindness from men like Greg has an expiration date. It's only good until they feel secure enough to reveal their true intentions. That shift came slowly, almost invisibly at first. A comment here, a suggestion there. Mom, this house is a lot to manage on your own. Wouldn't you feel safer in a smaller place? Have you thought about moving into assisted living communities? Some of them are really nice. The first time he mentioned assisted living, I laughed it off. Greg, I'm 70 now, not 90. I'm perfectly fine here. But he didn't laugh with me. He just smiled in that thin way that made my stomach turn. Soon, Linda's tone began to echo his. She, too, started bringing up the house more and more. She'd say things like, Mom, this place has so much potential. If Greg and I moved in, we could remodel it. Bring it back to life, I wanted to ask her. Bring it back to life? What do you think I've been doing for the past 40 years? Every coat of paint, every blooming flower in the garden, every photo frame on the mantel. This house had been my life's work. But instead of fighting, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was just idle talk, that she didn't mean it. Yet each time they visited, their eyes scanned the walls and furniture, like buyers surveying a property, not family visiting a mother. The day it became undeniable was a Sunday afternoon. I'd made roast chicken, Linda's favorite as a child. As we ate, Greg leaned back in his chair, fork dangling between his fingers, and said casually, So, Mom, when you go, what happens to this place? The room went cold. Linda didn't flinch, didn't scold him for his insensitivity. She simply placed her fork down and said, Well, it'll be mine, won't it? I looked at her then, really looked, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Certainty. Not a hope, not a wish. Certainty, as though my home were already hers, and I was merely a guest overstaying my welcome. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I haven't gone anywhere yet. Greg chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Of course, Mom. We just want to be prepared, that. Night after they left, I walked through each room of the house slowly. My fingers brushed against the bookshelves Thomas built with his own hands, the curtains I sewed when money was tight, the family photos that told a story of a life built from nothing but love and labor. And I realized Linda didn't see any of it. To her, it wasn't history. It wasn't sacrifice. It was real estate. The conversations didn't stop there. They only grew bolder. Linda began to talk about what she'd change once it was hers. This wallpaper is outdated. I'd tear it down. That old oak tree should go. It blocks the light. This whole place could be worth double if we just remodeled. Every word was a knife twisting in me. I wanted to scream, This is not a project. This is my home. But instead, I bit my tongue, afraid of driving her further away. Then came the suggestions. No, the pressures. Mom, you're not getting any younger. Maybe it's time to think practically. Wouldn't it be easier if you just signed the house over to me now? That way it's settled. I laughed nervously, pretending it was a joke. But Linda's eyes didn't waver. She wasn't joking. That was the moment I knew something had shifted permanently. She wasn't waiting for me to pass on. She wanted the house now. And worse, Greg was fueling the fire. I overheard him once on the phone speaking to someone about future property. His tone was smug, as if he already owned it. My stomach sank when I realized he was talking about my house. It hit me then. This wasn't just my daughter anymore. It was my daughter and her husband, united in seeing me as nothing more than a barrier between them and the life they wanted. I started to lose sleep. Every creak of the house at night reminded me it was mine, yet soon it might not be. My home no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a battleground, and the people I loved most were on the other side. And then came the breaking point, the night they decided to make their move, the night they forced my hand, the night Linda screamed those words, "This is my house now." But what she didn't know was that her betrayal had already pushed me to act. Months earlier, I had taken steps she could never have imagined, steps that would turn her confidence to ash. The night it finally happened, the rain had been falling for hours, pounding against the roof like an angry drum. I'd been sitting in the living room, a cup of tea cooling untouched in my hands, when I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Linda's car. I thought maybe she had come to visit me, perhaps even to make peace after weeks of cold remarks and tense silences. But as I rose from my chair and peered out the window, I saw Greg climbing out beside her, carrying what looked like a folder of papers tucked under his arm. Something in my stomach twisted. This wasn't a casual visit. The knock on the door came hard and fast. When I opened it, Linda didn't even smile. Her face was set, determined, like she had practiced this moment in a mirror. Greg hovered just behind her, smirking faintly as though the outcome was already decided. "Mom," Linda said, her tone sharp, "it's time you faced reality." I frowned, clutching my cardigan tighter around me. "What are you talking about?" She stepped inside without asking, brushing past me. "This house. You can't take care of it anymore. It's too much for you." Greg followed her in, flipping open his folder. "We've had the locks changed, Mrs. Parker. You'll need to start looking for somewhere else, maybe a nice retirement home. We can even help you find one." For a moment, the world spun. I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. You changed the locks?" Linda crossed her arms, her chin tilted defiantly. "Yes, this is my house now. You've had your time here." "It's mine," I laughed, a bitter, shaky sound that even surprised me. "Yours?" "Linda, this is my home. I raised you in this house." Her eyes were cold, unflinching. "Exactly. You raised me here, which means it should pass to me. Dad's gone. You're old. It's time to move on." Greg added, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just pack your things. We'll give you a week." I stared at them both, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The girl I had rocked to sleep, whose fevered forehead I had cooled with trembling hands, now stood in my living room declaring me homeless. When I didn't move, Greg's smile faltered. "We'll be back tomorrow to help you transition. But for tonight, it's best you leave." And then Linda said it, the words that seared into me forever. "This is my house now." She pushed me toward the door, the strength in her shove shocking for someone I once carried in my arms. I stumbled out onto the porch, the cold rain instantly soaking through my clothes. Before I could turn back, she slammed the door. I heard the lock click, sharp and final. I pounded on the door with my fist, shouting her name. "Linda! Open this door! You can't do this!" But there was only silence. Then the faint sound of laughter, her laughter from inside. I sank onto the porch steps, the rain streaming down my face until I couldn't tell where the tears ended, and the storm began. My body shivered with cold, but it was the ice in my daughter's heart that chilled me most. Neighbors' curtains twitched. I knew they saw me out there, hunched in the storm, begging at my own front door. Humiliation burned through me, hotter than any fever. The whispers would spread by morning. Poor old Ruth Parker thrown out by her own daughter. I sat there until my legs gave out, then dragged myself to the car parked at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat, shivering, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth. The familiar smell of old upholstery comforted me more than the thought of the house behind me ever could now. Through the windshield, I stared at the glowing windows of the home I had built, where Linda now walked freely, claiming it as hers. And though my chest ached with betrayal, another feeling slowly began to rise. Resolve. Because Linda had no idea that I had already seen this coming. She didn't know that weeks earlier I had visited my lawyer. She didn't know about the document tucked safely away in his office drawer. She didn't know that the real deed to the house bore only one name, mine. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. But she was wrong. The storm outside that night was nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash, and when the truth came, it wouldn't be me left out in the rain. The night in the rain broke something inside me, but it also lit a fire I thought had long since gone out. When I woke stiff and shivering in the front seat of my car the next morning, I wasn't just an old woman discarded by her own child. I was a mother with nothing left to lose and everything still to fight for. The first call I made was to Mr. Harris, my lawyer. A calm, steady man with white hair and sharp eyes. He had been the one to guide me months earlier when I confessed my fears about Linda and Greg circling the house like vultures. I'll never forget his words that day in his office. "Mrs. Parker," he said, leaning forward, "you are not the first parent to be pressured like this. And you won't be the last. But you can be the one who is prepared. Let's make sure no one takes from you what you've earned." So together, we drafted the papers. He advised me to place the deed entirely in my name, ironclad with no room for contest. He had seen too many cases where children bullied their way into property that wasn't theirs. I walked out of his office that day, lighter, reassured, and now I clung to that memory like a lifeline. When I told him what had happened the night before, the lockout, the screaming, the humiliation, his voice sharpened. "Stay calm, Mrs. Parker. I'll meet you at the house this afternoon. Let them think they've won for now," so I did. I waited. I watched the hours crawl by until at last, Mr. Harris's dark sedan pulled into my driveway. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, the kind of man who carried authority in the way he stood, the way he adjusted his glasses. I followed him up the walk, my heart hammering. My house loomed before us, its white paint streaked with rain, the curtains drawn tight. Behind those curtains, Linda and Greg had made themselves comfortable, convinced they'd claimed victory. Mr. Harris knocked firmly. Within moments, the door opened. Greg appeared first, his expression smug. "Well, well. If it isn't Mrs. Parker and her babysitter, I'm sorry, Ruth, but this is our house now. You should probably start packing what's left of your things." But then Linda appeared at his side. Her face was tight, but her eyes sparkled with triumph. "Mom, I told you last night. You can't handle this place anymore. It's mine now. I'm not backing down." Mr. Harris's lips twitched into a polite but pointed smile. "Is that so?" He adjusted his glasses, then lifted his briefcase onto the porch railing, snapping it open. From inside, he pulled a thick, official-looking folder. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "Allow me to clear it up," Greg scoffed, crossing his arms. "And who are you supposed to be?" "I'm Mrs. Parker's attorney," Mr. Harris replied calmly, "and I have here the legally binding deed to this property." At the word deed, Linda's smirk faltered. Mr. Harris unfolded the document, the embossed seal catching the sunlight, the ink sharp and undeniable. He held it up so they both could see. "As you can clearly read, the sole owner of this property is Ruth Parker. Not her daughter, not her son-in-law, only Ruth Parker. Which means that what you did last night was not only cruel, but illegal." The color drained from Linda's face. She blinked rapidly, her lips parting but no words coming out. Greg leaned closer to squint at the paper, his bravado slipping. This can't be right," Linda stammered, her voice suddenly small. "Oh, it's quite right," Mr. Harris said firmly, "and I suggest you vacate the premises immediately before the police have to get involved. Locking the rightful homeowner out of her own property is a serious offense." Neighbors began to gather again, drawn by the firm voices and the sight of papers waving on the porch. Curtains shifted, doors creaked open, whispers filled the street. Greg cursed under his breath, muttering something about lawyers ruining everything. Linda, however, looked like the floor had fallen out from under her. The triumph she wore the night before had dissolved into pale horror. Her hands shook as she reached out, as if to grab the deed from Mr. Harris, but he pulled it back smoothly. "This is not yours to touch. Do you understand me?" Linda's eyes flicked to me then. For the first time in years, there was no anger in them, no arrogance, only desperation. But it was too late. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the strength of every sacrifice, every hardship, every tear that had built this home. My voice didn't tremble as I said, "This house was never yours, Linda. It was mine then. It's mine now, and it will be mine until the day I decide otherwise." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no sound came out. And in that silence, in that moment of her pale, stunned face, I finally felt something I hadn't in a long, long time: vindication. For a long, breathless moment, the porch was silent except for the rustle of papers in Mr. Harris's hand and the rainwater still dripping from the gutters above. Linda's eyes darted between the deed, my face, and the small but growing crowd gathering on the sidewalk. The neighbors had seen. Me humiliated the night before. Now they were here to witness the tables turning. Her lips trembled, and then suddenly her voice cracked into a scream. "This isn't fair. I deserve this house. I'm your daughter. Who else should it go to?" Her words echoed down the street, shrill and furious. A few neighbors gasped. One older woman shook her head, muttering something under her breath. I stood straighter, my hands no longer trembling. "You don't earn a home by demanding it, Linda. You don't take what doesn't belong to you. You earn it through sacrifice, through love, through respect, and you've shown me none of that." Greg's face darkened, his smugness now a mask of thinly veiled rage. "This is ridiculous," he snapped at Mr. Harris. "We've been living here for months." "That's got to count for something." Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow, his tone cool and professional. "Actually, it counts for nothing. At best, you're guests. At worst, you're trespassers. Either way, your legal claim to this property is non-existent. If you don't vacate willingly, the authorities will ensure you do." The murmurs from the neighbors grew louder. Phones were raised, recording the confrontation. I caught sight of Mrs. Dawson from across the street, her hand pressed to her mouth in disbelief. Mr. Richards, who'd lived next door for decades, crossed his arms with a look that said, "Finally, justice." Linda's face flushed red, then pale, then red again. She clutched Greg's arm like a lifeline. "We can't just leave," she cried. "This was supposed to be ours." "You promised me, Greg. You promised we'd get this house." Greg jerked his arm free, clearly uncomfortable under the gaze of the neighbors. "Calm down, Linda. You're making a scene." "A scene?" she shouted, her voice breaking. "I've been waiting for this my whole life, and she jabbed a finger at me. "She ruined it. She always ruins everything." The venom in her tone made me wince, but I stood my ground. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking back. I wasn't the one apologizing. "I ruined everything," I said softly but firmly. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed so you could have a good life. And this is how you repay me, by locking me out in the rain, by trying to steal the roof over my head." Her face twisted, torn between shame and fury. For a moment, she looked like a little girl again, cornered, defensive, unable to admit fault. But then the neighbors' murmurs reached her ears, and she realized everyone was watching. Her pride shattered. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Not out of remorse, I could tell, but out of humiliation. She couldn't stand that her grand claim to my house had been torn apart in front of half the street. Greg muttered something about calling a real lawyer and stormed inside. Linda followed, her shoulders shaking. A few moments later, they re-emerged, dragging out hastily, packed bags. Mr. Harris stepped aside, giving them space but watching closely. "I'll remind you both," he said crisply, "that any further attempt to harass or intimidate Mrs. Parker will result in immediate legal action. Consider this your warning." As they passed me, Linda paused. Her tear-streaked face met mine, and for the briefest second I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But then her jaw hardened, and she hissed, "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because as she dragged her suitcase down the steps, past the stares of every neighbor, it was clear who had already lost. The moment the car pulled away, the tension on the street broke. Neighbors approached me, some clapping me gently on the shoulder, others murmuring words of support. "Good for you, Ruth. You did the right thing. Don't let them bully you again." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. For once, I wasn't the subject of pity, but of respect. Mr. Harris placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "You're stronger than you realize, Mrs. Parker." You stood your ground. As the crowd slowly dispersed, I turned back to my house. My home. Its white siding gleamed damp in the afternoon light, the garden dripping with rain, the windows fogged from the storm. It had weathered so much, just like me. But though the house stood strong, my heart ached, because no victory in the world could erase the truth. I had just thrown out my only daughter, and I knew the hardest part was yet to come. That night, after the shouting, after the neighbors drifted back to their homes, and after Mr. Harris left with a firm handshake and a promise to keep watch over the deed, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet again, too quiet. The walls still held echoes of my daughter's screams, her words slicing deeper than any storm ever could. This is my house now. I walked slowly through each room, touching the things that carried stories only I remembered. The scratch on the banister from when Linda tripped, running down the stairs on her first day of high school. The dent in the kitchen table where Thomas had dropped a toolbox while laughing at his own clumsiness. The faded outline of a rug long since thrown out, where Linda had played with dolls while I read aloud from my library books. This house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was blood, sweat, sacrifice, memory, and Linda had treated it like a prize to be won in a contest she believed she deserved by default. But that night, as I stood in the center of the living room, I realized something with painful clarity. It wasn't just about the house. It was about respect, about dignity, about the line I had finally drawn. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. I wrote about everything I had endured, the sacrifices I'd made, the humiliations I had swallowed, and the cruel truth that the daughter I once cradled in my arms had grown into someone I could no longer trust. And then I called Mr. Harris again the next morning. When he picked up, I didn't hesitate. "I want to change my will," I said firmly. "I want to make sure Linda and Greg never get this house. Not now, not ever." There was silence on the line for a beat, then his voice, steady as always. "I'll draw up the papers." It broke my heart to say the words, but it also brought a sense of relief. I had given Linda every chance to love me for who I was, not for what I owned, and she had shown me again and again where her loyalties lay. When I signed the new documents a week later, I felt like I was signing more than just legal papers. I was signing a declaration of independence from the chains of guilt that had bound me as a mother. I was acknowledging that sometimes love isn't enough to excuse betrayal. The house, along with the modest savings and pension I had, would now go to someone else. Not strangers exactly, but people who had shown me kindness when Linda had shown me cruelty. My neighbor, Mrs. Dawson, who brought me soup when I was sick. My church, which kept me company through long winters. A scholarship fund in Thomas's name for children who loved books as much as he once did. Linda had assumed blood alone gave her ownership, but love, sacrifice, and loyalty meant far more to me than blood ever could. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood about what had happened. Some pitied Linda, saying perhaps she was just misguided. But most shook their heads in disgust. They told me, "Ruth, you did the right thing. Family isn't about taking, it's about giving." And in those words, I found a strange comfort, because though I had lost my daughter to greed, I hadn't lost everything. I still had a home, I still had my dignity, and I still had the power to decide who deserved the fruits of my labor. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from Linda. Not a phone call, not a letter, not a knock on the door. Sometimes I wondered if she would ever come back, not for the house, but for me. I wondered if she'd ever see past her own pride long enough to realize what she had destroyed. But as the days turned into months, I began to accept that maybe she never would. And perhaps that was the final twist in this story. The daughter who thought she gained everything ended up with nothing at all, not even her mother's love. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip low over the garden Thomas and I had planted so many years ago. The air was warm, carrying the smell of lilacs. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. I whispered to myself, almost as if Thomas were there beside me. She thought she owned this house, but all she lost was me. And in that moment, I realized the truth every parent eventually faces. Sometimes protecting yourself means letting go of the child you once protected. It was the hardest choice I had ever made, but it was mine, just like the house.